It's exactly what I wished for, Christian said as he pointed to the path on the other side of the fence. Here, the going is much easier. Come on, Hopeful, let's cross over. But, Hopeful said, as his mouth screwed to one side, what if this path should lead us out of the way? That's not likely, Christian said. Look, doesn't it run alongside our way, but just on the other side of the fence? So Christian's argument persuaded Hopeful, and he followed him over the stile. Once they had crossed over and were walking on the parallel path, they found it much easier on their feet. Besides that, they spotted a man walking the path ahead of them. His name was Vain Confidence. They called after him and asked him where that way led. He said, "To the celestial gate." Christian smiled at Hopeful. "See, didn't I tell you so? With this advice, you can be sure we are going in the right direction." So they followed Vain Confidence, who went before them. But once night fell, it grew very dark. In fact, it was so dark they could no longer see the man walking before them. The man himself, Vain Confidence by name, could not see the way before him either, and he fell into a deep pit. This pit was dug in that place purposefully by the prince of those grounds to catch vainglorious fools, so they would be dashed to pieces. And so it happened to Vain Confidence when he fell. He who trusts in his own heart is a fool, but he who walks wisely will be delivered. Proverbs chapter 28, verse 26. Now Christian and Hopeful heard him fall, so they called out to him to figure out what had happened. But there was no answer, only a groaning. Hopeful said, "Where are we now?" Christian was silent, for he was wondering if he had led his friend out of the way. And now it began to rain with thunder and lightning in a most dreadful manner. Water rose and began to flood the path. Hopeful groaned inwardly and said, "Oh, if only I had stayed on the way." Who could have thought that this path would have led us out of the way? Christian asked. Hopeful said, "From the beginning I was afraid that this would happen, and so I gave you that gentle warning. I would have spoken a little more directly, but you are older than me in the faith. Good brother, please don't be offended. I am sorry I have brought you out of the way and exposed you to such impending danger. I plead with you, my brother, forgive me. I did not act with evil intent." "Be comforted, my brother, for I forgive you," Hopeful answered, "and I also believe that this shall work out for our good." Christian said, "I am glad I have a merciful brother traveling with me, but we must not stand here like this. We must try to go back to the right way. In that case, brother Christian, let me lead the way." No, Christian reached out in the dark and placed his hand on Hopeful's arm. "If you please, let me go first. Then, if we happen to run into any danger, I will encounter it first. since I am the one responsible for leading us out of the way. No, said Hopeful over the sound of rising water. You shall not go first, because your mind is troubled, and for this reason it may lead you further out of the way. Then, for encouragement, they heard the voice of one saying, Let your heart be set toward the highway, even the way that you formerly went. Turn and go back again. Set up for yourself road marks. Place for yourself guide posts. Direct your mind to the highway, the way by which you went. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 21. But by this time the flood waters had risen much higher and made the way back very dangerous. Then I understood that it is easier to go out of the way when we are in it than it is to go in when we are out. Yet the two pilgrims made every effort to go back. It was so dark and the flood so high that in their attempt to go back, they could have easily been drowned 9 or 10 times. They could not, with all the skill they had, get back to the stile that night. Therefore, they finally found refuge under a little shelter. They sat down there till the break of day, but being weary, they fell asleep. Not far from the place where they lay, there was a castle called Doubting Castle. The owner of it was Giant Despair, and it was on his grounds they now slept. And so early in the morning, when the giant got up and walked up and down in his fields, he caught Christian and Hopeful asleep on his property. With a grim, surly voice, the giant ordered them to wake up, and he asked, Where are you from? And what are you doing on my property? The two explained they were pilgrims who had lost their way. Then Giant Despair said, You have trespassed against me by trampling upon and lying on my grounds. Therefore, you must come along with me. So Christian and Hopeful were forced to go with the giant because he was stronger than them. As they walked along, they had very little to say, for they recognized their current circumstances were their fault. The giant drove them ahead of himself and eventually secured them in a very dark dungeon in his castle. The spirits of the two prisoners found the dungeon to be nasty and stinking, but here they lay from Wednesday morning until Saturday night, without receiving one bit of bread or a drop to drink. They remained in the dark all that time, and no one even came to ask how they were. Therefore they found themselves in this evil place, far from friends and acquaintances. You have removed lover and friend far from me. My acquaintances are in darkness. Psalm 88, verse 18. Christian sorrow multiplied in this place, because it was through his hasty advice that they were brought into this distressing state of affairs. Now Giant Despair had a wife, and her name was Diffidence. So when the giant went to bed that evening, he told his wife what he had done, explaining that he had taken a couple of prisoners and thrown them into his dungeon for trespassing on his grounds. Then he asked for advice. What do you think I should do with these prisoners? tomorrow.